She hadn't planned to ride this far. Marlene Cruz was the kind of woman who didn't make a habit of asking for help. At 32, she'd managed her family's ranch alone for 4 years, ever since her father's hands got too stiff to hold the reins, and her brother disappeared into a city that swallowed him whole. She knew every inch of the Sonora borderlands. She knew which trails turned mean in the afternoon heat, which watering holes had gone dry, and which stretches of desert could make a grown man question every choice he'd ever made. But she hadn't known about the ridge. She also hadn't known about him. It started the way most bad days do, with a small decision that felt completely reasonable at the time. Marlene had woken before sunrise, pulled on her worn leather boots, and set out to check the eastern fence line. 3 of her cattle had wandered off the previous evening, and the tracks in the red dirt told her they'd gone deep into the canyon stretch, a rough, rocky corridor that cut between 2 ridgelines like an old scar. It wasn't her favorite trail. The rock faces were unstable, the brush grew thick and tangled, and in late summer, everything in that canyon seemed irritable. The lizards, the birds, the thorned plants that caught your clothes without apology. But she needed those cattle, so she saddled her horse, a steady bay mare named Kusa, packed half a canteen, and rode east as the sky turned from black to the particular blue that comes just before the sun remembers it exists. She found 2 of the 3 cattle by mid-morning, grazing lazily near a dry creek bed as if they hadn't caused her any trouble at all. She herded them back toward the main trail, tied them loosely to a juniper branch, and went back for the 3rd. That was when she met the cowboy. His name was Eli Voss. She knew the name distantly. Her neighbor Raymond had mentioned a nephew who'd come down from Colorado to help work some land up near the bluff. Tall man, Raymond had said. Quiet. Knows horses. That was the full description she'd been given, and standing there in the canyon dust, she had to admit it was accurate. He was tall, lean in the way desert living tends to make people, with a battered hat that had clearly survived more weather than most. He was working his own section of fence with a pair of pliers and a focused expression that suggested he hadn't noticed her yet. She cleared her throat. He turned around slowly, the way people do who are not easily startled. "You're Raymond's neighbor," he said. Not a question. "Marlene Cruz," she said. He nodded. "Eli Voss. You looking for a brown steer with a notched ear?" She raised an eyebrow. "I am." He saw it about a quarter mile that way. He pointed south, deeper into the canyon. "Moving slow. You might want to hurry before it finds the ravine." She thanked him with a single nod, the currency of people who didn't waste words, and pushed Kusa south. She found the steer exactly where he said it would be, about 40 feet from the ravine edge, chewing on a scraggly bush with complete indifference. She dismounted to get a better angle to herd it back without spooking it over the edge. That was when she stepped into the wrong shadow. She didn't see it. She rarely did the moment it mattered. The snake had been coiled beneath a flat rock shelf, pressed into the cool underneath space the way desert rattlesnakes do when the midday heat becomes unbearable. Marlene's boot came down 6 inches away, and that was close enough. The strike happened faster than thought, a white-hot pressure in her inner thigh, high up near the crease where leg met hip, a terrible, intimate location that sent immediate fear flooding through her before the venom itself had a chance to. She stumbled backwards. The steer bolted. She didn't care. Her hand went to the spot. Even through her riding jeans she could feel it, 2 small points of pressure, already beginning to swell. She looked down and saw the rattlesnake retreating into the rocks, unhurried, already uninterested in her now that it had defended itself. For 1 long second she stood completely still, running the calculations that every rancher who's lived near desert learns to run. Rattlesnake. High inner thigh. Distance from the heart. Distance from the nearest help. Temperature. Time of day. The numbers were not good. She opened her mouth and did something she almost never did. She called for help. Her voice carried in the canyon. The walls bounced it back to her, thin and strange-sounding. For a moment there was only silence and the distant shuffle of the steer disappearing into the brush. Then she heard boots moving fast over rock. Eli appeared around the bend in the trail at something between a walk and a run, the purposeful pace of a man who'd heard something in a voice and understood it immediately. He took one look at her face, at her hand pressed to her thigh, and his own expression shifted into something calm and serious. "What happened?" "Rattler," she said. "Right here." She indicated the location without embarrassment, because embarrassment was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. High up, inner thigh. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. He looked at the ground, saw the snake's retreating trail in the dust, confirmed it. Then he looked back at her. "How long ago?" 60 seconds, maybe less. "Can you get the jeans down?" She already had her belt unbuckled. This was not a moment for dignity. Venom from a rattlesnake bite to the femoral region, that close to the central artery, that close to the lymphatic highway that ran up into the body's core, moved differently than a bite to the hand or foot. She knew enough field medicine to know that the next several minutes would matter enormously. She worked the denim down to her knee. The bite was visible now. 2 small puncture marks already surrounded by the beginning of an ugly bruise, the flesh around them slightly pale and then deeply flushed at the edges. The swelling had already begun. She could feel the heat radiating from it. Eli crouched down and studied it without touching. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Tell me fast. Modern medicine says no cutting, no sucking. It doesn't actually pull the venom out, just causes more damage. You need antivenin, and you need it within the hour if possible." She stared at him. "Then what do you suggest we do?" "We ride, hard and fast. My truck is 20 minutes back the way I came. I have a phone with signal up on the bluff. We get you there. We call ahead to the hospital in Tucson. We drive while we talk to them. That's the best option." She considered arguing. She was not naturally inclined toward accepting another person's plan, but she looked at her leg, felt the throb already advancing upward with that particular insistence that the body uses when something is genuinely wrong, and she made the decision that later she would think of as the first real decision of a new chapter in her life. "Help me up," she said. He did. His hands were steady and careful, and he held her weight without comment while she pulled herself onto Kusa. Then he sprinted back to where his own horse was tied, a big gray gelding who stood rock still as Eli mounted in one clean motion, and they rode. The canyon blurred around her. She focused on staying upright, on keeping her breathing slow, on not thinking about the venom moving through her tissue with patient, purposeful chemistry. The throbbing had deepened into something that felt like pressure and heat combined, a spreading discomfort she could track as it moved. She gripped the saddle horn with both hands and let Kusa follow the gray. "Talk to me," Eli said as they rode. "About what?" "Doesn't matter, just talk." She understood. He wanted to monitor her speech, her coherence, the subtle signs that venom was reaching somewhere it shouldn't yet. "My father built the ranch 31 years ago, came up from Hermosillo with $300 and a horse that everyone told him was too old to be useful." She paused to breathe. "He proved them wrong about the horse." "What happened to him?" "Arthritis. He lives in the house. He grows tomatoes now and pretends he doesn't miss riding." Another breath. The trail widened as they emerged from the canyon into open scrubland. "He's going to be furious about this." "You'll be fine." "You don't know that." "No," Eli admitted, with an honesty she found oddly comforting. "But you're conscious, you're talking clearly, and we're almost to the bluff." They reached the bluff in 18 minutes. She knew because she'd been counting, measuring the time against the spreading heat in her leg. He got his phone out before the horse had fully stopped, dialing with one hand while helping her dismount with the other. She heard him speaking to a dispatcher, clear, factual, and unemotional, giving her weight, the approximate bite location, the approximate time, and the species. He handed the phone to her. A medical professional on the other end walked her through staying still, keeping her heart rate as low as possible,
and confirmed that Eli's truck could get her to a facility faster than any air transport they could scramble in this terrain. She handed the phone back. She sat in the dry grass on the edge of the bluff and looked out over the canyon while Eli loaded both horses into his trailer with quick, practiced efficiency. "You do this often? Medical emergencies in the desert?" "My mother was a wilderness EMT. She made sure I knew things." "Smart woman." "The smartest." He helped her into the passenger seat, gentle and matter-of-fact, and they drove. The drive to Tucson took 47 minutes. Later, she would not remember most of it. She remembered the way the desert slid past the window in the afternoon light, gold and rust and shadow. She remembered him asking her questions at regular intervals, what year it was, what her father's name was, what she'd had for breakfast, the professional rhythm of someone monitoring her alertness. She answered each one correctly, and finding in that correctness a small, stubborn pride. She remembered at some point telling him about her brother. She hadn't intended to. The words simply came, the way words sometimes do when the body is preoccupied with something urgent and the usual guardedness relaxes. She told him how Marco left for Phoenix at 23 and called every week for the first year and then every month and then not at all. How she'd driven to the city twice to find him and found two different versions of the same sad story. How she'd come back to the ranch both times and thrown herself into work the way people throw themselves into rivers, not to swim, just to stop standing still. Eli listened without offering anything, and that was the right thing. He understood somehow the distinction between someone needing to be heard and someone needing to be answered. At the hospital, things became fast and procedural. They gave her antivenom. They monitored her vitals with the careful attention that a snakebite to the proximal thigh commanded. A young doctor explained to her that the location of the bite was genuinely dangerous, closer to central circulation than most extremity bites, and that the timing had been important. A few hours of delay in these conditions, and the conversation might have been very different.
She was kept overnight for observation. When she woke the next morning, she expected to find herself alone. That was the pattern she'd built. Situations resolved, people returning to their own lives, Marlene Cruz managing the remainder by herself. It was a pattern she'd built deliberately, carefully, the way you build anything you intend to be permanent. Eli was in the chair by the window, asleep with his hat on his knee. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything. The morning light came through the blinds in thin strips and fell across the floor. Outside, she could hear the ordinary sounds of a hospital beginning its day. She thought about what the doctor had said. A few hours of delay, a very different conversation. She thought about 60 seconds, the time between the bite and when she'd called out. 60 seconds of standing alone in the canyon doing her arithmetic, deciding whether to ask for help or figure it out herself. 60 seconds that had mattered. "You're awake," Eli said, without opening his eyes. "How did you know?" "Your breathing changed." He opened his eyes then, settled his hat back on his head, and looked at her with the same calm expression he'd worn in the canyon. Not searching, not expectant, just present. "How do you feel?" "Like something bit me," she said. Something in his face relaxed, and she understood that he had been more worried than he had shown. She spent another day in the hospital. Her father came, furious, as she'd predicted, and then immediately, demonstrably relieved, which was the other thing she'd predicted. He sat beside her bed and held her hand with his stiff fingers, and said very little, which was how he expressed most of the things that mattered. Raymond came too, and confirmed that Eli had simply not left the hospital since bringing her in, had slept in the waiting room the first night and the chair the second, had called Raymond once to check on the horses. "He's like that," Raymond said, with the satisfied tone of someone who has been waiting to make an introduction for some time. "Doesn't make a lot of noise about things." Marlene looked out the window. The desert was visible from here, faint and distant and beautiful in the particular way that things are beautiful when you've almost lost the chance to see them. She thought about the patterns she'd built, the careful, deliberate architecture of a life managed alone.
She thought about 60 seconds. She thought about how the bravest thing she'd done in a day was not the thing she'd done alone. Sometimes the bravest thing is the moment you open your mouth and trust that someone is close enough to hear. That she'd spent 4 years building walls and calling it strength, and in 60 seconds in a desert canyon, a snake had accidentally dismantled more of those walls than 4 years of her own effort had. She would tell him that she had been afraid in that canyon, not just of the venom, afraid of needing, afraid of what it meant if she couldn't handle it herself. And she called out anyway. Her father would nod slowly, the way he did when something confirmed what he'd long suspected. He would look out at the desert and say, "Your grandmother used to say that the desert teaches one thing above everything else." "What's that?" she'd ask. "That nothing survives alone," he'd say. "Not the cactus, not the hawk, not the river. Everything is connected to something. The ones who pretend they aren't are just lying to themselves." She would sit with that for a long time. And she would think about a canyon and a gray horse and a man who brought 2 post-hole diggers because he'd already decided to stay. The desert is full of things that can hurt you. Sharp edges, hidden creatures, heat that comes down like a judgment. Any rancher knows this. You learn the risks and you manage them and you keep moving. But the desert is also full of something else, a vastness that puts things in proportion. Standing in it, you understand on a level that has nothing to do with thought that your story is small and enormous at the same time, that the things you carry alone might be shared, that the walls you build, however well constructed, are still just walls. Marlene Cruz is not the same woman who rode into that canyon in August. She is not softer, exactly, or less capable. She still wakes before sunrise. She still knows every inch of her land. She still handles most things herself, and handles them well. But she left a door open. And sometimes that is everything.